Letter to Sir WLTR Raleigh. A letter of the author's expounding his whole intention in the course of this work, which, for that it giveth great light to the reader, for the better understanding, is hereunto annexed. To the right noble and valorous Sir WLTR Raleigh, Knight. Lo, Warding of the Stannaries, and Her Majesty's Lieutenant of the County of Cornwall. Sir. Knowing how doubtfully all allegories may be constructed, and this book of mine, which I have entitled the Faerie Queene, being a continued allegory or dark conceit, I have thought good, as well for avoiding of jealous opinions and misconstructions, as also for your better light in reading thereof. Being so, by you commanded to discover unto you the general intention and meaning, which in the whole course thereof I have fashioned, without expressing of any particular purposes, or by accidents therein occasioned. The general end, therefore, of all the book is to fashion a gentleman or noble person in virtuous and gentle discipline, which for that I conceived should be most plausible and pleasing, being colored with an historical fiction, the which the most part of men delight to read, rather for variety of matter than for profit of the ensample. I chose the history of King Arthur, as most fit for the excellency of his person, being made famous by many men's former works, and also furthest from the danger of envy and suspicion of present time. In which I have followed all the antique poets historical. First Homer, who in the persons of Agamemnon and Ulysses hath ensampled a good governor and a virtuous man, the one in his Iliads, the other in his Odysseys. Then Virgil, whose like intention was to do in the person of Aeneas. After him, Ariosto comprised them both in his Orlando. And lately Tasso dissevered them again, and formed both parts in two persons, namely, that part which they in philosophy call ethos, or virtues of a private man, colored in his Rinaldo, the other named Politis in his Godfredo. By ensample of which excellent poets, I labor to portrait in Arthur, before he was king, the image of a brave knight, perfected in the 12 private moral virtues as Aristotle hath devised, which if I find to be well accepted, I may be perhaps encouraged to frame the other part of politic virtues in his person, after he came to be king. To some, I know this method will seem displeasant, which had rather have good discipline delivered plainly in way of precepts, or sermoned at large, as they use, than thus cloudily enwrapped in allegorical devises. But such, meseem, should be satisfied with the use of these days, seeing all things accounted by their shows, and nothing esteemed of that is not delightful and pleasing to common sense. For this cause is Xenophon preferred before Plato, for that the one, in the exquisite depth of his judgment, formed a commonwealth, such as it should be. But the other, in the person of Cyrus and the Persians, fashioned a government, such as might best be. So much more profitable and gracious is doctrine by ensample than by rule. So have I labored to do in the person of Arthur, whom I conceive, after his long education by Timon, to whom he was by Merlin delivered to be brought up, so soon as he was born of the Lady Igraine, to have seen in a dream or vision the Faerie Queene, with whose excellent beauty ravished, he awaking, resolved to seek her out. And so, being by Merlin armed, and by Timon throughly instructed, he went to seek her forth in fairyland. In that Faerie Queene, I mean glory in my general intention. But in my particular, I conceive the most excellent and glorious person of our sovereign the Queen, and her kingdom in fairyland. And yet, in some places else, I do otherwise shadow her. For considering she beareth two persons, the one of a most royal queen or empress, the other of a most virtuous and beautiful lady. This latter part in some places I do express in Belphobe, fashioning her name according to your own excellent conceit of Cynthia, Phoebe and Cynthia being both names of Diana. So in the person of Prince Arthur I set forth magnificence in particular, which virtue, for that, according to Aristotle and the rest, it is the perfection of all the rest, and containeth in it them all. Therefore in the whole course I mention the deeds of Arthur applicable to the virtue, which I write of in that book. But of the 12 other virtues I make 12 other knights the patrons, for the more variety of the historic, of which these 3 books contain 3. The first of the Knight of the Red Cross, in whom I express holiness. The second of Sir Guyon, in whom I set forth temperance. The third of Britomardes, a lady knight, in whom I picture chastity. But because the beginning of the whole work seemeth abrupt, and as depending upon other antecedents, it needs that ye know the occasion of these 3 nights' several adventures. For the method of a poet historical is not such as of an historiographer. For an historiographer discourseth of affairs orderly, as they were done, accounting as well the times as the actions. But a poet thrusteth into the middest, even where it most concerneth him, and there recoursing to the things forepast, and divining of things to come, maketh a pleasing analysis of all. The beginning, therefore, of my history, if it were to be told by an historiographer, should be the 12th book, which is the last, where I devise that the Faerie Queene kept her annual feast 12 days, up in which 12 several days the occasions of the 12 several adventures happened, which being undertaken by 12 several nights, are in these 12 books severally handled and discoursed. The first was this. In the beginning of the feast, there presented himself a tall, clownish young man, who falling before the Queen of Faeries desired a boon, as the manner then was, which during that feast she might not refuse, which was that he might have the achievement of any adventure, which during that feast should happen. That being granted, he rested himself on the fior, unfit through his rusticity for a better place. Soon after entered a fair lady in mourning weeds, riding on a white assa, with a dwarf behind her leading a warlike steed, that bore the arms of a knight, and his spear in the dwarf's hand. She falling before the Queen of Faeries, complained that her father and mother, an ancient king and queen, had been by an huge dragon many years shut up in a brazen castle, who thence suffered them not to issue, and therefore besought the Faerie Queene to assign her some one of her knights to take on him that exploit. Presently that clownish person upstarting desired that adventure, whereat the queen much wondering, and the lady much gainsaying, yet he earnestly importuned his desire. In the end the lady told him that unless that armor which she brought would serve him, that is, the armor of a Christian man specified by St. Paul 5 Fs, that he could not succeed in that enterprise, which being forthwith put upon him with due furnitures thereunto, he seemed the goodliest man in all that company, and was well liked of the lady. And eftsoons taking on him knighthood, and mounting on that strong courser, he went forth with her on that adventure, where beginneth the first book, viz. A gentle knight was pricking on the plain, etc. The second day there came in a palmer bearing an infant with bloody hands, whose parents he complained to have been slain by an enchantress called Acrasia, and therefore craved of the Faerie Queene to appoint him some knight to perform that adventure, which being assigned to Sir Guyon, he presently went forth with the same palmer, which is the beginning of the second book and the whole subject thereof. The third day there came in a groom, who complained before the Faerie Queene that a vile enchanter called Buseraine had in hand a most fair lady, called Amoretta, whom he kept in most grievous torment. Whereupon Sir Skewdamer, the lover of that lady, presently took on him that adventure. But being unable to perform it by reason of the hard enchantments, after long sorrow, in the end met with Britomardes, who succored him and rescued his love. But by occasion hereof, many other adventures are intermeddled, but rather as accidents than intendments. As the love of Britomart, the overthrow of Merinal, the misery of Florimel, the virtuousness of Belphobe, and many the like. Thus much, sir, I have briefly overrun to direct your understanding to the wellhead of the history, that from thence gathering the whole intention of the conceit, ye may as in a handful gripe all the discourse, which otherwise may haply seem tedious and confused. So humbly craving the continuance of your honorable favor towards me, and eternal establishment of your happens, I humbly take leave. Yours most humbly affectionate, EDM, SBNSER, 23 January, 1589. The letter served as an introduction to the first 3 books of the Faerie Queene, an allusion to Sir Walter Raleigh's poem Cynthia,